It's Monday, February 14th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Today I'd like to talk about a very important issue for Catholic parents, very important issue for homeschooling parents, an issue that I'm wrestling through myself as a Catholic parent, and it's the issue of Catholic children when they enter into adulthood choosing to leave the Catholic Church or reject the Catholic faith. If you have adult children, you may be working through this or have had to go through this yourself. If you don't have any adult children but are raising little ones, you may think that you'll never face this, but you will. The numbers are hard to believe. Georgetown University published a study that showed in 2020, Americans who had been raised Catholic were asked if they still identify as Catholics. And Georgetown University, based on the results of this study, estimated that in America, 29.5 million people, 29.5 million people were raised Catholic and no longer identify as Catholic. 29.5 million people were raised Catholic and no longer identify as Catholic. So like I said, if you're a younger parent and you've got little ones and you're talking about raising saints and you think that you'll never experience the things that other Catholic parents experience, you're going to learn the hard way that that's not true. It's very common for Catholics from strong Catholic families who are immersed in Catholic culture, who participate in the sacramental life all their lives, reach young adulthood and fall away from the Catholic faith, fall away from the habits that they've learned growing up in Catholic homes, fall away from participation in the sacraments, fall away from Mass attendance, fall away from making confession, fall away from praying and studying the scriptures or Catholic writings. 29.5 million Americans who were raised Catholic no longer identify as Catholics. Those numbers are just incredible. Now, there will be all kinds of opinions about what the cause of this falling away is. And it's common to hear people complaining in modern society that, oh, this is the result of the Second Vatican Council. This is the result of the clergy abuse scandals. This is the result of this or that, blaming parents, schools, the clergy, the Pope, the Second Vatican Council, on, blaming all of these different possible sources for causing this great falling away of young adults. The reason why I want to talk about this topic is because I disagree with the popular common accusations and opinions about the cause of what's going on, why so many young Catholics are falling away from the faith, what the real cause is, and more importantly, I'd like to talk about what I believe the real solution is. What's the real remedy to this problem of Catholics young Catholic adults falling away from the faith. And those of you, like I said, who have young children and haven't yet raised a Catholic adult, I want you to listen to this because you have a lot of work to do. Those of you who are older and already have adult children, if you've had children fall away or appear to fall away, I'd like you to listen because you can work to remedy this problem. It's not a hopeless cause. It's in your control as a parent, and you've got work to do, whether you're a young parent with little ones or an older parent with adult children. We have work to do. And I'm going to get into the details of this and talk about it in a very personal and practical way. I'm going to start by talking about my own family life. I have 10 children. I'm a 47-year-old father of 10 children. My oldest is 22 years old. My youngest is 7 years old. So we've got a 15-year span, and we've got 10 children in that 15-year span. My oldest is a son who's 22 years old. He's an ROTC student at UNC Charlotte here nearby. My second oldest is a daughter. She's also in the ROTC program. She's a medic in the Army. My older son's a military police officer. Both of them are in the ROTC program, studying for careers as Army officers, college paid, doing well. They're good kids. We have good relationships. My third child is 19 years old. He's discerning what he'd like to do now that he's finished with his high school study. He's also in the military. He's in the reserves, a combat engineer, and he's got lots of options. He's got a girlfriend he's been with, a really great girl, great family that he's spending a lot of time with. He may end up marrying. So he's got different things in view right now than my two older do. And then at home, we have 7 homeschooling children, ages 17 down to 7. So that's the layout of my children. 3 adult children, all of whom have been homeschooled from the beginning, all of whom have been raised in the Catholic Church, very diligently taught, trained in Catholic habits, disciplined morally. They've all served the church, either serving at Mass as altar servers or serving as volunteers with faith formation classes. They've been to monasteries and convents. They've been to vocation retreats as teenagers. They've been raised in the Catholic faith, in the Catholic Church, in a Catholic family. However, when each of my oldest 3 children reached adulthood and became, legally speaking, independent, they've gone through a time where they've basically thrown off Catholic disciplines, Catholic sacramental participation, even Mass attendance, as they entered into independent adult life. You can imagine that my wife and I are unhappy with decisions that they make. We're unhappy with things that they've done. And yet at the same time, and this is what's important, while I could easily prescribe a better path for my children, my adult children, than the paths that they've chosen, I can see, by my experience with them, I can see what actually happens to Catholic kids when they enter into adulthood that causes them to fall away from the faith. Or more importantly, and this is something I want to emphasize, what causes them to appear to fall away from the faith when they enter into adulthood. what really got me thinking about this is that my wife and I both have very close, excellent, loving relationships with our adult children. Very intimate, very personal. Um, and so we talk about everything. We know what they're up to. We know what's going on. We talk about things. They tell us what's going on. And there's a lesson that I learned as a parent when my kids were younger. And the lesson that I learned was it's often difficult to judge whether a kid is being evil or whether he's simply being childish. It's difficult to judge if a kid is being intentionally, knowingly evil, or if he's simply being childish and immature. And as a father, there was a way that not that there was a way, there is a way that I judge my children's behavior. And I can tell by their reaction when they do something that I consider to be bad behavior. I can tell whether it actually is bad behavior coming from a bad spirit, an anti-Christian, disobedient, faithless spirit, or whether it's just childishness or curiosity or immaturity. I can tell by the spirit of the child after they've done something that I consider bad. When a child is doing something bad and he's being moved to do it by bad motives, bad desires, bad influences, bad interests, I can tell because, like Adam in the Garden of Eden, he hides. He tries to cover it. He's being sneaky. He's cunning in his disobedience. I can tell by that cunning, sneaky, secretive, deceitful spirit. That's the disobedience that I've learned to be most concerned with. But there are other times where I've learned from interacting with my kids that even though they've done something bad, they really don't understand what they've done, or they didn't intend it, or they were just curious. And it wasn't really evil. It was more of a natural disobedience that's just caused by not having faith, not having hope or charity, being curious to know about something like the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. They're just curious, and their curiosity or their immaturity or lack of grace just led them into trouble, but they have a good disposition. And I can tell that they didn't intend to do what was bad. And I've been surprised by these things many times through the years parenting the kids. I've been surprised to see that a kid has done something bad and really didn't intend evil. It was just sort of a natural, simple inclination to some behavior that's not consistent with the Christian life, but it wasn't intentionally evil or sought out. And so I've learned over time to discern between these two different spirits. Learn when it's time to teach and explain things as opposed to when it's time to punish and to penalize a child for bad behavior. So I've learned that by experience through the years, raising 10 children. What's interesting to me, and again, getting back to why I'd like to talk about this topic of kids falling away from the faith, is that as my adult children have moved out of the house and into their adult life, they've made decisions and they've done things and they've taken on habits of life that personally I don't like. It's hard at this point in their life to not judge them hypocritically because many of us did the same things when we were their age. And I try to always keep that in perspective. I did a lot of what I would consider bad or foolish things when I was a young adult, but I did them for a number of reasons. I didn't necessarily do them because I was seeking to be a sinner or seeking to reject God and abandon the Christian faith. There were a number of different influences in my life that were moving me to do things that I didn't necessarily want to do, but often felt that I had to do. St. Paul talks about this struggle in his epistle to the Romans. He says, the good things that I want to do, I don't do, but the bad things that I don't want to do, these things I do. And there's a wrestling, and we wrestle with this every day, if you're honest. As a Catholic adult, you're not living as well as you'd like to live. You do many things. We do many things that we don't want to do. That's why we go to confession. There are good things that we would like to do that we fail to do. And there are bad things that we don't want to do that we fall into and do. It's part of our weakness as human beings. Sin is a part of the Christian life. And I'm not justifying any sin. I'm simply stating the reality that sin is a normal part of the Christian life. That's why we have the sacrament of reconciliation and why we open every single Mass with a confession of sins and a general absolution. Sin is a part of the Christian life. We're seeking salvation from our sin. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. And when our children enter into adult life, I think we've greatly underestimated the challenges that they face when they enter into adult life, especially in 21st century America. When they reach age 18 and they're free legally to move on their own, start their own life as adults, make their own choices with regard to vocations, occupations, relationships, they're free to make those choices. The church teaches they're free. We as parents don't have the right to drive their life as if they're robots or slaves that we control. They have the freedom to make their own choices. And legally, they're allowed to begin making these choices as soon as they turn 18 years old. And obviously, they're not ready for the difficulties that they have to face at that age. They're not ready for the temptations in the world. They're not ready for the complexity of life in modern society. They're not ready for the freedom that they have to learn to live with in modern society. I believe that as Catholic parents, we greatly underestimate the challenges that our kids face when they become young adults. And because we underestimate those challenges, I think we wrongly interpret what they do in that phase of their life. Let me repeat that because this is very important. I believe that as Catholics, we underestimate the challenge that our children face when they enter into adulthood. And because we underestimate the challenge, I believe that we overreact to the choices that they make. I think we interpret the choices that they make wrongly by reading into them motives that don't actually exist. And because we underestimate the challenge, we overreact to the problems, we end up doing things that are the opposite of what our kids actually need us to do at that point in their lives. And here's my real argument. I believe that the reaction of Catholic parents and Catholic pastors to the kids at that point in their lives is what actually pushes them out of the Catholic faith. I believe we actually react wrongly, and rather than the children leaving the Catholic faith or leaving the Catholic Church, I believe that at a point in their young adult life, our reaction to their decisions and choices that they make as young adults, our reaction actually pushes them out of the Catholic Church and further away from the Catholic faith. Now, the reason why I say this, like I said, is because I've paid attention to the decisions and the attitudes and the discussions that I've had with my adult kids. Like I said, we have very good relationships. There's no family quarrels. There's no prodigal children or scandalous behavior or nastiness. We have very happy relationships with our kids. Very good, intimate, personal, loving relation. I have a 22-year-old son who every time we talk, before we get off the phone, tells me he loves me. I have a daughter, a 20-year-old daughter, who every time she's home, she's in my office hugging me. I have very good relationships with my kids, and that gives me an opportunity to talk with them about a lot of issues. And they know that I'm willing to talk because they've been homeschooled. They know what I teach. They know what I study. They know what I'm about. They know I'll be honest. They trust me. And we have open conversations about things that I know Catholics in modern society aren't able to have open conversations about because of political hang-ups and concern about what other people think and things like that. I keep our family life pretty private because I want my kids' privacy to be protected, and I want us to always to be able to talk comfortably and freely, and we do, thank God. But what's happened over the past, let's say, 3 years since the time my oldest son became an adult? Like I said, they've made decisions that I don't agree with and that they know I don't agree with. They've made these decisions. They've gotten themselves into trouble at times because the consequences of decisions they make are come to pass and they have to deal with them. But one thing that I've noticed is that there's something different. There's something different because, like I said, the statistic says 29.5 million Americans were raised Catholic and no longer identify as Catholics. That's the part that interests me. They were raised Catholic, but they no longer identify as Catholics. This is what I noticed in my kids. While my kids have made dumb adult decisions and made mistakes, and they're learning a lot of lessons the hard way, there's one thing that I've noticed about them, and it's that they insist on identifying as Catholics. They are offended and immediately start defending themselves if I ever suggest that they're no longer Catholics. They make it very clear that they are Catholics and that they believe in the Catholic Church, that they know the Catholic Church is true. They could never belong to any other religious group or church or denomination. They make it very clear that they do not have doubts about the Catholic faith or the Catholic Church. And what I've noticed is that's not the issue. That's not the issue. The decisions they make, the errors they make, the mistakes they make, the trouble they get into is not a result of a willful, nasty, defiant, ungrateful, disobedient spirit that wants to throw off Christianity and run into sin voluntarily. There's two different things going on in the kids' lives that I notice. One is what they actually do, and the other is what they want to do. What they want to do. And I've seen that the decisions that they've made, the mistakes that they've made, are not things that they necessarily choose freely to do. They're not what Aristotle would call deliberate choices. They're not intentional. They're not premeditated. They're things that happen. Things that happen, things they do in reaction to influences in their lives, almost instinctive choices rather than deliberate choices or free choices. They desire to identify as Catholics. They respect the Catholic Church. But here's the thing. The challenge that they face in early adulthood is so great that it's just too difficult. It's too difficult to keep everything in line all together at this crucial point in their lives. There's too many uncertainties, too many questions, too many pressures, too many opportunities, too many distractions. The challenge of this young adult life is so great, so complex, so deceitful, so distracting, so tempting, that they can't keep it all together. And so there's an appearance of falling away. And like I said, I think we overreact to this appearance of falling away. And because we overreact to it, we interpret it falsely, and then we react to it in ways that are not helpful. But what I believe is that the challenge is so great that it's like a ship at sea that's sailing along and everything is fine, when all of a sudden a storm comes upon the sea and the ship has to go through a terrible storm. You can't judge the ship for what happens during the storm because the ship is being beaten and tossed to and fro by the wind and the waves of this storm. If you were just to look at the ship in the midst of the storm and judge the ship as if it was acting independently by its own choice, it'd be a ridiculous judgment of the ship, because the ship is being attacked and tossed about during the storm. When the storm stops and the waters calm and the winds die down, then we get a chance to see what the ship's made of. We get a chance to see how the ship is actually doing. Not in the midst of the storm, but after the storm. When all of those outside influences and external forces that beat against the ship without the ship's choice to have them do so, when those external factors go away, we then have a chance to look at the ship and see that the ship made it through the storm. I think this is the condition of kids in young adulthood. I think that the trouble that they face, the challenges they face, the numerous angles that temptations and distractions and anxieties come from in their lives toss them all about as they enter young adulthood. And they're in a state that I call survival mode. They're just trying to survive. They're trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to figure out how to earn money they need. They're trying to figure out how to get through studies. They're trying to figure out relationship questions and issues. They're trying to figure out religious questions and issues. They've got all of these things at this crucial moment of their life, all in chaos and disarray, because they're actually stepping out into a storm, and they no longer have all of the protection and security of their parents and their Catholic family, their Catholic home. They're seeking to step out into that world for themselves and, over time, establish their own home, their own life. And that initial step away from the home is just filled with chaos and confusion and attacks from every side that they have to deal with that they've never experienced before. Plus, they have a lot of ideas in their head that are false, but they are never going to know that they're false until they have a chance to try them out. They've looked at the world their whole lives growing up within a Christian family, within a Catholic homeschool life. They've looked out at the world and they've had thoughts about whether or not what their parents tell them is true. Mom and dad say that this is bad. Mom and dad say that this kind of person is dangerous. Mom and dad say that this is a bad career. Mom and dad say that I need to stay away from this and this is a bad place to be. But I'm not sure that they're right, and I'd like to just go check it out. There's a lot of curiosity in them where they have all kinds of thoughts and ideas and opinions that they've developed through the years growing up in a Christian family. And they need to check some of those things out and put their ideas to the test. They need to learn by their own experience and by their own observations that the things that mom and dad have taught them, the things that the Catholic faith have taught them, are actually true. That it's not just what dad believes. It's not just mom's faith. It's not just the flavor of religion that we call Catholic. It's actually the truth. And really, the only way that we become persuaded of some points of faith and morals is by actually experiencing the truth. We've done that in our own lives. The reason why we hold many of the beliefs and moral positions that we hold is because of things that we've experienced. We didn't sit around reading a book or listen to the homilies of a priest and say, oh, I'm never, ever going to try that. We have tried many evil things, and we've found them to be empty and unhappy, and our rejection of them and our choice or desire for better things has often come as a result of bad experiences in sin or in disobedience in the world. And there are some things that our kids simply won't embrace by a blind, trusting faith that they need to check out for themselves. And so I attribute that kind of experimenting as a kind of natural desire to be persuaded. That's not necessarily evil. And it's the means by which they can actually become personally persuaded that what they've been taught is really true and can be embraced, and they can rest in that teaching for the rest of their lives. So I look at this young adult period of their life as sort of a baby bird moving out of the nest and having to face all of these forces and dangers and threats on its own. And I don't think it's fair to judge that young adult as if he should have everything together, as if he should be able to step out of the house and live with the confidence and the wisdom, the prudence of his father, who's 25 years older and has learned many things over the years by experience, by hardships, by hard lessons learned. I don't think it's reasonable to get upset with a 20-year-old young man because he doesn't act and think like his 45-year-old Catholic father. Or the same thing with a young lady because she doesn't act like her 40-year-old Catholic mother who's already been through all these things, has made all her own mistakes and bad decisions, and has learned over time and matured and become stable in her Catholic life, to look at the girl now and say, oh, look at this foolish girl, how many terrible things she's doing. This is her opportunity to learn and to become persuaded that the Catholic faith is in fact true, that things really are as mom and dad have said they are, assuming mom and dad teach the kids truly. So the kids enter into this young adulthood, and like I said, I think the challenge is far, far greater than we pretend it is. I think our expectations of our kids' behavior and choices is unrealistic. I think we overreact to the bad decisions that they make, to the choices that they make, to the habits that they break and things like that. I think we overreact, and I think we interpret them unreasonably. We read into them more than we should, and we leap to conclusions that are not true and that are not fair. And like I said, I've learned this by talking to my kids and seeing that some of the things that they've done that I'm not happy about, they really haven't done intentionally. Or they're facing a number of different problems and challenges that they have to figure out and sort out and to get their life organized. And that's led them to make some bad choices, to make some wrong priorities, and make bad decisions. For example, when the kids go out into the world and they need to make some money, one of the first things that they learn is it's very easy to find work on Sundays. And they take it for granted that they grow up in a house where their father never, ever works on a Sunday. I never work on Sundays. They've never seen me work on a Sunday. Even when I'm at my desk or in my office or I go for a walk to record a talk, I always devote Sundays to spiritual talks, Catholic theology courses that I'd like to work on. I always focus on something that's theological or spiritual, or that has to do with some work of mercy, spending time with my parents, things like that. My kids have taken that for granted, and they never realized how difficult it is to establish a household where a man does not work on the Lord's Day. That takes work, that takes time to establish that freedom and commit to that principle, that commandment, to become obedient to that commandment as the head of a household. That's not easy to do. And when the kids enter young adulthood, they're just overwhelmed by the difficulty of managing school and work and bills and all the kinds of things that they have to deal with. And the next thing you know, the kids have a part-time job working on Sundays. And like I said, as a 45-year-old, 47-year-old Catholic father who never works on Sunday, I'm upset that they've gone from a family where we never work on Sunday to start an adult life where they're working on Sundays. But when I talk to them about that, it's not their intention or desire to work on Sunday. They feel like it's just a temporary necessity, and they're simultaneously looking for a better opportunity that will allow them to not do that anymore. And so there's two sides of this decision-making, two sides of this young adult life that I think we have to judge the kids realistically with. I think we have to realize that they have a lot of work to do to get their lives sorted out, especially young men. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and experience and self-improvement to build an orderly Catholic life. And we underestimate the complexity of that. We don't think realistically about how we did it when we were younger. And we overreact to our kids' decisions. And again, I'm not justifying any of this. I'm not saying that they need to do it or they should do it. I'm just saying there are reasons why these things happen in the lives of young adults in American society. And it's not necessarily because the kids are just wicked and ungrateful and they hate God and they don't want to be Christians anymore. That's not true. It's very difficult to live according to Christian principles in modern American society when you're just getting started as a 20-year-old young man or young woman. Very difficult. So just to summarize again, I believe that the challenge that they face is far greater than we admit. I should have said this before, but I don't believe we prepare them sufficiently for the reality of the challenge that they face. And this is true of parents. This is true of Catholic schools. This is true of Catholic pastors and priests. We do not prepare these children for the challenges that they face. We set them up to fail. And because our standards are so much lower than they should be to prepare these kids well, we make this ugly path through early adulthood a necessity for them because we do not prepare them, or we do not prepare even ourselves. We don't prepare for their entrance into young adulthood. We leave them to work out too much on their own, and that leads to all kinds of problems. The challenge is much greater than we admit. We don't prepare them sufficiently for that challenge. And like I said, that's true of parents, of schools, and of pastors. When they make bad decisions, we overreact. We interpret them unreasonably. And the danger that I want to focus on is that we then make decisions that either help them to persevere and overcome in those difficult times, in that difficult period of their life. We either make decisions that help them through those difficult times, or, which I believe is more common, we make decisions during those difficult times that actually cause them to crash and burn. And that needs to be what we fear. Like I said earlier, I think when our kids get to a certain point, when Catholic kids enter into young adulthood and start making decisions their parents don't like, parents are tempted to react in the wrong way. And if they do so, they push the kids out of the Catholic faith. Priests can do the same things. They don't stay in touch with kids. They don't act like shepherds. The kids enter into these difficult circumstances and they have no help. They have no support. And they simply get overwhelmed. And being overwhelmed, feeling all of the pressure, being frustrated by their own failures, and receiving no help, they see their families and the Catholic faith and the Catholic life as having nothing to offer them. And they simply look elsewhere for help. And they often find it. And I believe that that's the cause. That's the actual cause of the falling away from the Catholic faith and from the Catholic Church. When young adults get to the point where they no longer wish to identify as Catholics, I think that that is a crucial difference. Failing to live up to the standards of the Catholic life is one thing. And to a degree, we all fail to live up to the standard of the Catholic life. For our kids to not be doing all the things that they should be doing as Catholics, and even to be doing things they should not be doing, that's one thing. But to come to the point where one chooses to no longer identify as Catholic, that is a very different point in their lives. And I believe that we can prevent that. I don't believe that we can necessarily prevent the beating that they have to go through when they enter into young adulthood and all of the chaos that rushes into their life at that time. I don't believe that we can save them from every bad decision, every mistake, every stupid choice, every broken habit, every sin. I don't believe we can prevent that. We have to do better helping to prevent that. But I don't believe we can prevent all of that because the challenge is so great and it's real. It's a necessary challenge that they have to engage with and overcome. But I believe that the falling away to the point where they no longer identify Catholics as Catholic, I believe that something else happens that causes that change. And that change, I believe, is avoidable. And I'd like to talk about that. Jesus teaches us a parable of the sower. And if you don't know this parable, you should look it up and read it because it's very helpful. And realize this is Christ himself teaching us about how the spiritual life works. This isn't some human theory. This isn't some idea or illustration that some clever teacher came up with. This is Christ himself explaining to us how the spiritual life works. He says that a sower went out to sow seed, and he went about the field, old-fashioned style, where the farmer just went out with a big bag of seed and threw it around in the field by hand. None of this fancy modern seed planting machines or anything like that. Just walked about tossing the seed, trying to spread it evenly as best he can. But as he walks about and throws the seed falls onto different surfaces. Some of the seed falls into the prepared fertile soil as he desires. Some of the seed falls into areas where he hasn't really cleared all of the weeds and thorns out. Some of the seed flies onto paths and roadways that are compressed from animals or carts traveling on them, and they don't even have any loose soil to take root in. The seed is the same for all of those different circumstances, but the soil is different. The seed doesn't have the same opportunity to grow in each of those different circumstances. And Jesus tells us that when the seed is thrown onto stony ground, onto hard ground, where it can't get into the soil and germinate, but it just lays on the surface, he says the birds of the air come and they pick it up and they eat it. They take it away. And he says there's other soil where the seed falls on shallow soil. There's a little bit of soil there. And so there's enough soil for the seed to germinate and begin to take root. But what happens is the soil is shallow, and therefore it dries out quickly, and there's no moisture. And when the sun comes out in its full strength at midday, the heat and the evaporation of the sun is so powerful, and the plant is not able to get enough moisture so that the plant dries up and is just consumed by the heat of the fire. The same heat and light that gives the plant life becomes too much and overwhelms the plant. It doesn't have the support, it doesn't have the nutriment or the moisture that it needs to receive that heat and react to that heat and grow from it. and then the good seed, then the other seed falls into the good soil where everything works and it successfully germinates and grows and bears fruit. I believe that when our kids enter into young adulthood, they're like the seed cast in on the shallow soil. And when they step into adult life, they're like that young, germinating seedling, all of a sudden in the presence of this hot, burning summer sun. And it's just too much. It's too much for the plant to bear. The plant can't get the moisture and nutriment it needs to be able to handle the intensity of that sun. And so what happens in a situation like that? What happens in a garden where we see that there's an area where the plants aren't in a good place? Well, that's where the gardener comes in to help. The gardener looks at the plants, assesses what the plants need, and supplies it artificially. The gardener brings water to the plants because they can't get enough water by themselves. And if they're not artificially watered by the gardener, they'll dry up and die. The gardener doesn't stand there and look at the plants and take notes and judge the plants. He looks at the plants, sees what's going on, and then he provides the remedy that those plants need. The gardener waters the plants. The gardener adds fertilizer. The gardener may mulch the soil. He tills around the plants and removes weeds. But I think what happens to our kids is they get into this place where they're young adults, they have this independence, and yet when they step out of the house, when they step out from under the protection and order and provision of their Catholic family, they find that the sun is just way hotter and more intense than they thought it would be, and they start to die. This is why I keep saying they appear to fall away. They appear just like a plant that's in shallow soil when it faces the heat of the sun. It appears to be no good. It appears to be good for nothing. But that's not the end of the story. Just like the plant can be helped along by the gardener, our kids at that point in their lives need to be helped by their parents, by their pastors. They need to be helped at that point. And what's difficult about helping kids at that point is that they are trying their hardest to establish their independence and pretend they don't need any help, but they do need help. And they, if they're flexing their muscles a little bit and trying to be independent, trying to go their own way, they're going to want to resist that help because they know the implications of that help. They know that there are religious strings attached to help from mom and dad. They understand that, and that's a good thing. But they need their parents to help them at that time, to be like the gardener who has an abundance of water and fertilizer and mulch ready and available to help that young plant. Parents have to come to the help of their kids during these times, and they have to counter the effects of that challenge by their own generous support of their children during those difficult years. The parents are going to be challenged to continue helping as the kids make bad decisions, as the kids get themselves into trouble that could and should have been avoided. The parents have to keep helping. The parents have to keep loving, keep teaching, keep forgiving, keep communicating. Because the kids at that point need help. They need to be cultivated by a gardener who has what they need. The parents have to help the kids through that initial trial. And we can call it a trial by fire because that's what it's like. The challenge is so great that there's no way a kid can handle it on his own. There's no way that a kid, of course, with grace he can, but that's none of our business because we can't give our kids grace. And we can't presume on God's grace or tempt God and say, well, if you don't give him grace, then who cares? We have to do what's in our control. That's our responsibility. We have to love our neighbor as ourselves. We have to work so that we may share. We have to help our children. And all of the works of mercy are true of our relationship to our children. They need us during those years to generously help them, to tolerate all kinds of bad decisions and mistakes, to be patient with them, to understand the difficulty of the times that they're going through, and to simply help them and help them and help them through those most difficult times. Now, I want you to think about what the effect of this would be. These kids grow up in these Catholic homes. They hear the teaching of their parents. They hear the teaching of their priests. They learn the teaching of the church, but they have doubts. They have their own thoughts. They have their own ideas. They have their own curiosities. They have their own interests. And they hit age 18 and they become free to go and act on all those ideas. Now imagine, they go out from under the protection and the shelter of their Catholic parents and their Catholic parish. Maybe they don't go to Mass anymore. Maybe they don't pray anymore. Maybe they make friends with kids that are no good for them, but they're interested in making friends with this or that kind of person. Maybe they start dating. Maybe they start working on Sunday, like I said. Maybe they get wrapped up in all kinds of financial pressure. Who knows? Whatever the problems may be. They get wrapped up in all these things and they make mistakes. And they learn that they make mistakes. They'll admit that they make mistakes. But at that time, when they're in this difficult point in their life, the most difficult period of their lives, the people around them are all put to the test. All the people around them in their lives are given an opportunity to show what they're made of. The unbelievers in their lives, the bad friends in their lives, the bad girlfriends or boyfriends in their lives, other adults in their lives, their priests, their parents, their siblings, are all given the opportunity to show what they're made of during those hard times. Christian parents who have the graces of faith, hope, and charity. Christian parents, during those difficult years of their children's adult lives, should be seen by their children to be the best people in their lives. They should be seen to be the only ones who are always there to help. They should be seen as the ones who are always the ones who tell the truth, who give good advice, who practice what they preach, who come to the rescue, who love and forgive, who are patient, who are supportive, who are helpful. Those hard years should be a trial period where our kids get a chance to see what all of the people around them are made of. And they should see that the Catholic people in their lives, especially their parents, are the best people in their lives. That hard period should be the period in the kids' lives where their parents prove their unique love. And that's why I say it's one thing for kids to appear to fall away from their Catholic faith and morals and church participation and so on. That's one thing. And it's understandable why they do that, especially in modern society. But for them to make the decision that Catholics are not the best people in their life, that Catholics are not the people with the best advice, Catholics are not the people who come to their help, who come to the rescue, who are there with them in the most embarrassing and difficult times, that Catholics are not the people who forgive them and help them and are patient with them, that is where I will argue that the switch flips and they choose that they no longer wish to identify as a Catholic or with Catholics. I believe that that's the cause of that second movement away from the faith. The first one, I think, is natural, reasonable, understandable, and able to be overcome. The second change that takes place, however, I believe is a result of the Catholics failing that kid in his young adult life. I'll give an example of this, again, from the teaching of Christ. He teaches the parable of the prodigal son. The son is raised in a good Jewish home. His father's a good, honest, generous, working man. His brother's a good man. He's in a good family. His father's servants are taken care of and respected as workers and fellow laborers in the household. This young boy sees all that, but he has his own thoughts. He has his own friends. He has his own desires and lusts and interests and curiosities. And when he reaches adulthood, he decides to go after them. He takes his inheritance money and he goes and he invests in this crowd that he thinks will make him happy. Leaves home, leaves his Jewish family, and goes and throws in his lot with the unbelievers. His experience leads him to the realization that these people are not his friends. And when he finally hits rock bottom in this realization, he runs out of money. The people who said that they would help don't help. The people who said that they were friends are not friends. The girls who said that they loved him do not love him. He finds himself in the gutter. And his mind is filled with memories of his family life. And the good memories of his family life lead him to say, I'm going to go back home because I know that my family is good. I know that my father is good. These people here are not good. This life here is not good. I've made mistakes. I've made bad decisions. I've wasted everything. I've learned the hard way. But I know one thing, and it's my father is good. And I'm going to go back home because I've learned that my father is the real deal. He's good. He is my true friend. And I'm going to go back home. And in the parable of the prodigal son, that boy goes back home humbled, having learned all of his lessons the hard way, and persuaded that there's no place like home. He comes back home so humbled that he tells his father he's willing to live as a servant in the household because he doesn't deserve to live like a son. And what does he find? He finds a father who doesn't care about his bad choices, doesn't care about the money that was lost, doesn't care about the embarrassment that might have come by the news of this kid getting into all kinds of trouble. The father doesn't care about any of that stuff. The father says one thing. He says, my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and has been found. That's the life that we need to imitate as parents. When our kids enter into young adulthood, the Catholic faith goes on trial in their lives. And we either prove that we are the best grace-filled, loving, generous, forgiving, humble, patient, sacrificial people on earth, or we prove the opposite. We determine whether that second choice is made. The choice to test the waters is natural. The choice to reject the faith is a choice that follows that experience. It's a choice that comes after the trial is over. We can't be faulted for the first set of decisions. They're natural. But we can be faulted for the second decision by failing to do our duty, by failing to support our kids, to love our kids, to help them, to encourage them, to teach them, to continually support them, even when they're making bad decisions, to love them through those difficult times and prove our love. Prove that there's a real power in us that doesn't dry up. There's a real source of strength in us that allows us to go from strength to strength, like the Bible says. That allows them to see that there really is something powerful about the life of their parents that allows the parents to just keep loving, keep giving, keep forgiving, keep supporting, keep overcoming, keep encouraging through the end that separates his parents and the Catholics in his life from everybody else. We're on trial during that time in our kids' lives, and we have to work to pass that test and overcome those enemies that are competing with us for our children's souls as they get into young adulthood. Now, the reason why I say when we underestimate the challenge, when we overreact to their bad decisions, when we interpret their decisions unreasonably, unfairly, we're tempted ourselves to distance ourselves from them, to cut them off. That's a temptation that we have to understand and resist. It's so easy to excuse yourself from that relationship. It's so easy to say, hey, he's on his own now. He's got to learn the hard way. He's got to provide for himself. He's got to figure out. Think about what he's thinking when he hears that. In his trial, the Catholics say, you're on your own. Tough luck. You get what you deserve. Other people in his life aren't going to say that. And that's where the kids resolve to no longer identify as Catholics. There are 29.5 million Americans who no longer identify as Catholics, who refuse to identify as Catholics even though they were raised in the Catholic Church. That's a serious problem. But like I said, I don't think that problem that's described where people identify as non-Catholics, I don't believe that's the same problem as the appearance of falling away that happens in young adulthood. I believe that the appearance of falling away is something natural and normal. And as families, we have to work through those times. We have to get through it, overcome all the difficulties, forgive sins, and bail our kids out of problems they get themselves into, help them through those things, prove ourselves reliable and trustworthy, prove that we can always be counted on, prove that our love for them as parents is unconditional. And through that opportunity, through those experiences, we have a chance to persuade our kids that the love and the forgiveness and the kindness and the heavenly mindedness and the perseverance that we talk about in the Catholic life is not some Sunday school lesson. It's real. And other people in the world who don't have access to this grace can't fake it. It can't be copied. It can't be imitated because it's real. It's not just talk. It's power. Power that comes from God to be able to believe and hope and love in ways that no one else can. Our kids have a chance to experience the power of the Catholic life through the love and perseverance and patience of their parents. So to wrap this up, if you're an older parent and you've got adult kids, I'm sure that you know everything that I'm talking about down to the practical details. And I want you to understand that there's no situation you face that's unique, that's too bad or too dark or too far. Our kids make choices. Many of them are foolish, ignorant, immature, unnecessary, unjustifiable. But the question is always, what do we do next? What do they need to fix things, to make things right? That should be our concern. And you really have to dig deep. You have to have a spiritual life that supplies you with the virtue that's necessary to continue loving and giving and supporting and helping and encouraging and teaching and staying positive. You have to be the gardener in your children's life as the sun beats down on them and drives them out. The other illustration from the sower is that there's seed that falls into thorny soil, and the thorns compete for the nutrients and choke out the seed. The cares of this life. Our kids face that too. They're under a lot of pressure as young adults. We have to be like the gardener who comes to their assistance and helps them. Of course, God will help them as well, but like I said, we can't presume upon the grace of God. God can save people out of the worst situations, but that's not the normal way He intends to work. He intends to work through His people by their own works of mercy and charity. That's our responsibility. And if you're a young parent and you've got young children, they're safe and sound at home, you have your happy little domestic church, you may think that these things are never going to be a part of your family life, but you're wrong. These stories of kids leaving the church and falling away from these kids come from beautiful Christian homes. They come from great parents. You're going to experience these things to whatever degree or level or in your own unique way, and you need to prepare for them. You need to make sure that you give your children an experience in their Christian home that they never forget. You need to make sure that if they choose to walk away from the Catholic way of life, and they're like the prodigal son with their friends in the world, and they end up in the gutter, they have to be able to think back and remember what life was like in their Catholic home. You have the opportunity to create those memories. You can't control their choices, but you can control what they experience and remember as Catholic children growing up in a Catholic family. And for priests and pastors, they have to realize that their influence in these kids' lives is far more important than they seem to think it is. Many of them turn kids off to the Catholic faith by being silly, by clowning around, by trying to be cool. They actually show themselves to these kids in their hours of difficulty. They show them to be unreliable. They don't trust them. They don't think they have the answers. And that leads them to look for answers in other places. And kids need priests and pastors, confessors, to take that role seriously and understand how important that relationship is when kids get into trouble. Because the thought of confession, when you've made some really grievous decisions, when you've committed some really embarrassing sins, the thought of what that experience is going to be like when you go to confession can keep a kid away from going to confession. And priests have to realize how influential those relationships are during all those innocent years, how important that relationship is when the kids find themselves in the gutter and they think to themselves, maybe I'll go to church, maybe I'll go to confession. No, I can't go to. It's going to be, you can imagine how that lack of confidence discourages them from doing what's right. So it's parents, it's schools, it's what the kids are taught, the curriculum that they grow up learning. We have to give them preparation. We have to give them education that actually equips them for the challenges that they're going to face, complex philosophical challenges, complex economic challenges, complex moral challenges, complex theological, social, cultural challenges. We have to ask, is the education that we're giving the children, is it actually equipping them for those challenges? Or are we lost, worried about some worldly, modern, grade level, lazy standard, just thinking about diplomas and college admission rather than what's needed to handle this great conflict that they're going to face as young adults? I know my kids have been helped by their philosophical education. They've been helped by their classical education. I know that. They'll admit it themselves. I've seen how even an introductory knowledge of moral philosophy, catechesis, knowledge of the Bible, how it anchors them so that at least they have knowledge of what's right. Even if they're not practicing it, they know where to find the answers, and they know what real Catholicism actually says. They don't have some goofy, fake version that is easy to see through. They know, for example, what it's like to read St. Thomas Aquinas, that he's no joke, and that he has real answers and proofs. They know what it's like to read church fathers and to read Aristotle, to read the scriptures. They know what it's like to read the Gospels. They know what the lives of saints were like. They know what real Christians are like. But they're going to look for those Christians in their lives to see if they're real or if this is just a story. And we have to answer that challenge and be those real Christians. So I hope that that's helpful. Like I said, I'm going through these things currently as a Catholic father, but I'm encouraged, even though I see my kids making some decisions that I'm not happy about, or I see them getting themselves into trouble that they should have never gotten into in the first place. I understand my role. My wife understands her role. And we continue to see them fight and continue to wrestle and push. And we see just how great the challenge is, how many-sided this challenge is. And I'm confident that in time, and it may be years, in time, I believe that they're going to get on their feet, their life is going to stabilize, and they're going to be able to look back through these hard years and remember how we worked together, how we talked through things, how we overcame challenges, how we dealt with bad decisions and just stayed positive and kept moving forward, getting back up and getting back at it. They're going to remember that, and I think that they're going to overcome this trial of young adulthood. And while they may appear at points in this young adulthood to walk away from the Catholic faith that they're taught, the Catholic lifestyle that they grew up in, the celebration of the sacraments that they participated in as kids, they're going to settle. The storm is going to calm down, and they're going to be able to say that they persevered and overcame and didn't lose the faith. And our relationship and influence in their lives, they're always going to remember how it helped them through that storm. I hope that's helpful. God bless.